She said no at the ranch gate, then a quiet cowboy changed her fate. A man can ride past trouble and tell himself it belongs to someone else, but the sound of a broken heart has a way of following him down the road. Caleb Turner learned that on a hot afternoon in the Arizona Territory, when the dust was so thick it hung over the trail like old smoke. He had been riding since dawn with a bedroll behind his saddle, a canteen near empty, and a letter folded inside his coat from a ranch owner near Prescott who needed a steady foreman before the summer drives began. It was the first honest chance Caleb had been offered in years. He was 36, with sun-browned skin, tired blue eyes, and hands that knew rope, reins, and hard seasons better than they knew rest. His hat was faded at the brim. His boots were gray with trail dust. He carried a rifle because a man crossing open country had to, but he had no hunger for trouble. Trouble had already taken enough from him. 5 years earlier, fever had carried off his wife, Anna, in a little cabin outside Abilene. After that, Caleb had not stayed long anywhere. He worked where work was offered, slept where night found him, and kept moving because stillness had a way of making memories louder. By noon, he reached a narrow bend in the road where a line of cottonwoods marked a creek below. Beyond the trees sat a ranch with whitewashed fences, a windmill turning slow, and a long main house with a porch that faced the yard like a judge watching the guilty. A sign hung above the gate, burned into the wood in dark letters. Bell Crossing Ranch. Caleb slowed his horse, not because he meant to stop, but because something about the place felt too quiet. No children laughing, no ranch hands calling, no dog barking in the shade, only the windmill creaking and a horse stamping behind the barn. Then he heard a woman's voice. Not loud, not a scream. It was worse than that. It was a small, sharp sound like someone had tried to swallow pain and failed. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. For a few breaths he sat still in the saddle. The job in Prescott waited. His future waited. A clean bunk, steady pay, a reason to stay somewhere again. None of this was his affair, and a man could get killed stepping through the wrong gate on the wrong afternoon. But the sound came again. This time it carried words. I said no. The words were thin, but they did not break. Caleb turned his horse toward the gate. Inside the yard, the heat seemed heavier. Dust clung to the porch steps and the wagon wheels. A lantern hung from a beam, though it was daylight, rocking softly in the wind. Near the porch stood a young woman in a pale yellow dress with one sleeve torn at the shoulder. Her dark hair had slipped loose from its pins, and one hand held the porch rail as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Across from her stood a broad man with gray in his beard and anger in his face. He wore a fine vest despite the heat, and his boots were polished enough to tell Caleb he was not one of the hands. The man turned when Caleb rode in. This is private land, he said. You lost. No, Caleb answered. The woman looked at him then. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. There was fear in them, yes, but something stronger stood behind it. Pride, shame, a kind of tired courage that made Caleb's chest tighten. The man took one step down from the porch, then turned around. Caleb did not move. I heard a lady say no, he said. Figured I ought to make sure the word was understood. The man's mouth hardened. That lady is my daughter, and you have no place here. Caleb looked at the woman, not the man. Ma'am, are you safe? The man snapped. She does not answer strangers. Caleb kept his eyes on her. I asked her. The yard went so still that even the windmill seemed to pause. The woman swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the porch rail. Caleb could see the trembling in her hand, though she tried to hide it. My name is Lydia Bell, she said, and no, sir, I am not safe. The words landed harder than any gunshot. The man's face flushed dark. Lydia. She flinched at her name, but she did not take it back. Caleb swung down from his horse, slow and careful, keeping both hands where they could be seen. Caleb Turner, he said, passing through. Then keep passing, the man said. I might, Caleb answered, once I understand what I rode into. The front door opened behind Lydia, and an older woman in a faded apron appeared. She looked from Lydia to Caleb, then lowered her eyes fast, as if she had learned that looking too long at the truth could cost a person dearly. That told Caleb plenty. Lydia's father came down the last step. I am Lydia Bell. This ranch is mine. My daughter is promised to Mr. Amos Clegg, and she has taken to making scenes like a spoiled child. Lydia's face changed when the name was spoken. Not anger first, not even fear, it was something colder, a trapped look like a bird seeing the cage door close. I am not promised, she said. Silas turned his head slowly. You will be by Sunday. Caleb saw the truth then. It was not just a quarrel. It was a bargain being forced on a woman who had no say in it. He had seen men trade horses with more mercy than Lydia Bell was showing his own blood. Caleb took one step toward the porch. Miss Bell, do you want to marry this man? No, Lydia said. No shaking, no whispering, one clear word. Silas lifted his hand, not high but enough. That will not happen while I'm standing here, Caleb said. Silas stared at him, and for the first time Caleb saw calculation under the anger. The man was used to being obeyed, but he was also used to measuring risk. Caleb was a stranger, yes, but strangers had tongues. Strangers rode into towns. Strangers spoke to sheriffs, preachers, bankers, and ranchmen who cared more about reputation than mercy. You have no idea what she has cost me, Silas said. Caleb's voice stayed low. A daughter is not a debt to be collected. Lydia made a sound behind him, so small he almost missed it. Not a sob, a breath, as if someone had opened a window in a room where she had been suffocating for years. From the road beyond the gate came the rattle of wheels. Caleb turned his head. A black carriage rolled into view, pulled by two matched horses. A man sat inside with a silver-topped cane across his knees and a smile that did not belong in the heat of that yard. Lydia Bell straightened his vest. Lydia went still. That, Silas said quietly, is Amos Clegg. Caleb looked at the carriage, then at Lydia's white face, and understood that he had not arrived at the end of her trouble. He had arrived just as it was beginning. The carriage stopped just inside the gate, and the dust it raised drifted across the yard like a dirty curtain. Amos Clegg did not climb down at once. He sat there a moment, letting everyone look at him. He was near 50, narrow through the shoulders with a trimmed black beard and a pale face shaded by a fine hat. His coat was too clean for the country, and his gloves looked like they had never touched a rope in their life. Yet there was something hard in him, something sharp beneath the polish. He looked first at Lydia Bell, then at Lydia, then at Caleb. His smile thinned. Silas, he said, I was told this matter had been settled. Silas forced a laugh, but it had no warmth. It is settled. My daughter had a spell of foolishness, that's all. Lydia's fingers closed tighter around the porch rail. Caleb heard the wood creak under her grip. Amos stepped down from the carriage and brushed dust from his sleeve, though none had settled there. Foolishness can be corrected. Caleb did not like the way he said it. Lydia lifted her chin. I will not marry you, Mr. Clegg. Amos looked at her the way a shopkeeper might look at a cracked jar he had already paid for. A young woman in your position should be careful with proud words. Pride does not buy food. It does not keep a roof over your head. No, Lydia said, but neither does fear, not forever. For the first time, Amos's smile vanished. Silas moved fast then. He stepped toward her with his hand rising again, and Caleb caught his wrist before it reached her. The movement was quiet, but the meaning filled the yard. Silas froze. Caleb held him firmly, not twisting, not hurting him, only stopping him. I told you once. Amos's gaze dropped to Caleb's hand around Silas's wrist. And who exactly are you? Caleb Turner. That name means nothing to me. It does not need to. Amos's eyes narrowed. You are standing on another man's property, interfering with family business and a legal arrangement. There is nothing legal about forcing a woman to marry. Silas jerked his wrist free, more embarrassed than injured. His face had gone red clear up to his ears. You best watch your mouth. Caleb looked past him at Lydia. She stood straight now, but her breathing was uneven. The torn sleeve of her dress moved in the hot wind, and a dark bruise was beginning to show near her wrist. How old are you, Miss Bell? Caleb asked. 23. Then your answer is yours. Amos gave a soft laugh. That is a pretty thing to say on an empty stomach, but perhaps Miss Bell should explain how this ranch stands. Her father owes me money, considerable money. I have been patient, more patient than most men would be. Lydia looked at Silas, and something wounded passed across her face. What money? Silas did not answer. The older woman in the doorway pressed one hand to her mouth. Caleb noticed that too. What money? Lydia asked again, softer this time. Amos tapped his cane against the ground. Your father borrowed against the east pasture, the winter cattle, and half next season's calves. Bad luck, poor choices, a weak market. It hardly matters now. The debt remains. Lydia's eyes did not leave her father. You told me the ranch was strong. It is strong, Silas snapped. It will be once this marriage is done. The words struck her harder than any hand could have. She stepped back as if the porch had shifted beneath her. Caleb understood then that Lydia was not only being handed over. She was being used to cover a man's failure, a failure he had hidden under a polished vest and a loud voice. Amos walked closer, stopping only a few feet from the porch. I am offering a respectable home, protection, a name with weight. A woman could do worse. I would rather sleep under a wagon, Lydia said. Silas cursed under his breath. Amos's jaw tightened. You speak boldly because this drifter is standing here, but he will leave. Men like him always do. By sundown, he will remember he has his own road. Caleb felt those words settle in the old hollow place inside him. Men like him always did leave. He had left towns, ranches, graves, and memories. He had made a life out of not being needed. But Lydia was looking at him now, not pleading, not asking him to save her like some helpless thing. She looked at him as if she was trying to decide whether the world still had one decent corner left in it. Caleb turned to Silas. Where are her mother's things? Lydia blinked. What? Caleb kept his voice calm. A woman who ran this house since girlhood ought to have something that belongs to her. Money, jewelry, letters, a trunk, something. Silas's face changed too quickly. There it was. Lydia saw it too, her lips parted. Mama had a cedar box. Silas looked away. The older woman at the door whispered, in the study. The yard went silent. Silas turned on her. Martha, get inside. But the older woman did not move. Her face was pale and both hands trembled against her apron, but for once she stood her ground. Mrs. Bell kept papers in that box. She told me before she passed that they were for Lydia when she came of age. Lydia gripped the rail as if the whole porch had become a riverbank and she was trying not to be swept away. You told me there was nothing. Silas looked at his daughter, and for one brief second something like shame moved across his face. Then pride crushed it flat. Your mother did not understand business. No, Lydia said, her voice breaking at last, but she understood me. Amos's cane struck the dirt with a sharp tap. Enough, old papers do not erase debt. Maybe not, Caleb said, but hiding them might interest a judge. Silas's eyes cut to him. Caleb had no badge, no lawyer's book, and no desire to pretend otherwise. But he knew men. He knew the sudden fear of a secret being dragged into daylight. Bring the box, Caleb said. Silas gave a harsh laugh. You do not give orders here. No, Caleb said, but I can ride to Prescott and fetch the sheriff. Then he can ask for it." The wind moved through the yard. A horse shifted near the barn. Somewhere inside the house, a door creaked open and shut. Amos leaned toward Silas and spoke low, but not low enough. "If there are papers, get them. Better to see what they are before this becomes town gossip." Silas stood stiff as a post. Then he turned and went into the house. No one spoke while he was gone. Lydia stared at the doorway. Her face had gone quiet in a dangerous way, as if too much feeling had turned to stone. Caleb wanted to tell her that whatever was in that box, she would not face it alone. But words like that could become promises too quickly, and he was careful with promises. Silas returned carrying a small cedar box with brass corners darkened by age. Lydia took one step forward. He did not hand it to her. Caleb's voice lowered. "It belongs to her." For a moment, it seemed Silas might refuse just to prove he still could. Then he thrust the box toward Lydia. She held it like something alive. Her thumb brushed the lid. Dust marked her skin. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a folded letter, a silver locket, and a banknote wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Lydia picked up the letter. Her hands trembled so badly the paper shook. On the outside, in a woman's careful writing, were 4 words. "For my daughter, Lydia." Her breath caught. Caleb saw tears fill her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. She unfolded the letter. The first line was enough to change everything. Lydia read it once, then again, and all the color left her face. "My mother left me land," she whispered. Silas took a step toward her. "That was never meant to burden you." Lydia looked up at him, and now the tears did fall, silent and hot, down her cheeks. "No, it was meant to free me." Amos's expression hardened like dried clay. Caleb knew then that the cedar box had not only opened the past. It had opened a fight Lydia Bell, and Amos Clegg had never expected Lydia to survive. Lydia held the letter so tightly that the edges bent beneath her fingers. For a moment no one in the yard moved. The whole ranch seemed to be listening. The windmill groaned once. A horse knocked its hoof against a stall board. The lantern on the porch swung in the hot wind, though no one had lit it. Caleb watched Lydia read the letter again. Her lips moved over the words without sound. Her mother's handwriting had reached across years of silence and placed a truth in her hands that should never have been hidden. "What land?" Lydia asked. Silas rubbed one hand over his mouth. "It is nothing useful." "Then why hide it?" He looked toward Amos, then back at her. "Because you would not have understood." Lydia gave a small, broken laugh. "I have cooked for this ranch since I was 12. I have kept accounts you never looked at twice. I have patched shirts, counted flour, managed winter stores, and sat up with sick calves while you slept. But I could not understand land." Silas's eyes flashed. "You understand what I allowed you to understand." Those words told the truth better than he meant them to. Caleb took a slow breath. He could feel his anger rising, but anger was a horse that needed a firm rein. If he let it run, Lydia would pay the price. Men like Silas knew how to turn another man's temper into proof that they were the injured party. Amos stepped closer, his cane sinking into the dust. "Miss Bell, whatever that paper says, it does not change your father's debts. A woman alone with a strip of land and no protection will find the world colder than she imagines." Lydia folded the letter carefully. That small act told Caleb something. She was not breaking. She was putting herself back together piece by piece. "My mother says the creek pasture was deeded to me," Lydia said. 40 acres along Cottonwood Wash. It was her father's claim before she married. Silas looked away. Caleb knew the place. He had noticed it before reaching the ranch, the green line of cottonwoods and grass near the bend in the road. Water in dry country was not a small thing. 40 acres with creek access could matter more than 200 acres of dust. That land is worth something, Caleb said. Amos's face sharpened. Not to her. To anyone with cattle it is. Silas snapped. It is tied to this ranch. Is it? Caleb asked. Silas said nothing. Lydia looked down at the banknote tied with ribbon. There is money, too. Sentimental scraps, Silas muttered. Martha, still standing in the doorway, spoke in a voice so faint it nearly disappeared. Your mother sold 2 horses before she passed. She said the money was to help you leave someday if you needed to. Lydia closed her eyes. That was the moment the tears truly came. Not loud, not helpless, just 2 lines down her dusty face as she stood with the cedar box against her chest. Her mother had seen more than Lydia knew. Her mother had feared what might happen, and even dying she had tried to leave a door open. Caleb looked away for a second, giving her the only privacy the open yard allowed. If this truth touches your heart, stay with Lydia's journey, because some doors only open after years of being locked from the inside. Amos broke the silence. A touching story, but I hold notes signed by Lydia Bell. If the marriage does not happen, I will collect what is owed. Then collect it from him, Lydia said. Silas stared at her. You ungrateful girl. No, she said. I was grateful for scraps because I thought scraps were all I had. The words struck Silas hard. His jaw worked, but no answer came. Amos turned to Caleb. You have stirred up enough dust for one day. Take your horse and go. Caleb looked at Lydia. Do you want me to go? She met his eyes. The question sat between them heavier than any promise. She had known him less than an hour. He was a stranger with trailed dust on his coat and grief hidden behind his eyes. Trusting him would be foolish. But staying silent had nearly cost her a life she never chose. No, she said. I want you to stay until I can leave. Silas barked a laugh. Leave, with what? That box, a paper you barely understand, a few dollars. Lydia's hand went to the locket in the cedar box. She opened it with her thumb. Inside was a tiny painted likeness of her mother, young and solemn, with Lydia's same dark eyes. With what is mine, Lydia said. Caleb turned toward the barn. She will need her horse. Silas moved in front of him. You take one step toward my barn, and every hand on this ranch will drag you out. Caleb glanced around the quiet yard. Where are they? Silas stiffened. The question revealed another crack. The ranch yard should have had men in it at this hour. A place this size should have had 2 hands near the barn, one at the water trough, maybe another fixing tack in the shade. But the yard was empty. Martha answered before Silas could stop her. Most left last month. Mr. Bell could not pay wages. Amos's mouth tightened with irritation. He clearly did not like secrets spoken in front of strangers unless he was the one speaking them. Lydia turned slowly toward her father. You told me they were lazy. Silas's voice dropped. Enough. No, Lydia said. I think enough was years ago. The courage in her voice was thin, but it held. Caleb walked toward the barn. This time Silas did not stop him. Maybe he saw that the bluff was gone. Maybe he knew there was no one left to call. Or maybe some part of him understood that a daughter who had found her mother's letter would not be shoved back into silence so easily. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay, leather, and old dust. A chestnut mare lifted her head from a stall and gave a soft nicker. Lydia came in behind Caleb, still holding the cedar box. That's Ruby, she said. She was mine when I was a girl. Still is. Lydia's mouth trembled. I do not know any more. Caleb looked at the mare's gentle eyes and the worn ribbon tied to the stall latch. Looks like she knows. Lydia reached out. Ruby pressed her nose into Lydia's palm, and that small kindness undid her more than the shouting had. She leaned her forehead against the mare's face and breathed as if she had been running for years. Caleb busied himself with the saddle, giving her that moment. Outside, Amos and Silas spoke in low voices. Caleb could not catch every word, but he heard enough. Stop her before town. Not here. Then on the road. Caleb's hand stilled on the saddle strap. Lydia looked at him. What is it? He kept his voice quiet. We need to leave before they decide to smile again. She tucked the letter and money back into the cedar box, then placed the box inside a worn saddlebag. Her hands still shook, but they moved with purpose now. When they led Ruby out of the barn, the yard had changed. Amos stood by his carriage, face calm again. Silas stood near the porch, too quiet. That quiet worried Caleb more than his shouting. Lydia mounted Ruby with stiff grace. Caleb swung into his own saddle. At the gate, she looked back once at Bell Crossing Ranch, the house where she had buried her childhood, the porch where her no had nearly been taken from her, the window where Martha watched with tears on her face and one hand lifted in goodbye. Lydia lifted her hand back. Then she turned toward the road. Caleb rode beside her, not ahead of her, not leading her like property, but beside her like a witness. They had gone only half a mile when Caleb saw fresh hoofprints crossing the trail ahead. 3 riders, waiting somewhere beyond the cottonwoods. Caleb did not stop when he saw the hoofprints. Stopping too quick could tell hidden men they had been noticed, so he kept his horse at the same steady walk, eyes lowered as if he was only watching the trail. Beside him, Lydia rode Ruby with the cedar box tucked safe in the saddlebag, her face turned toward the cottonwoods ahead. The creek made a soft sound beyond the trees, water over stone, leaves trembling in the dry wind. It should have been a peaceful place, the kind of shade a traveler thanked heaven for after miles of sun. But Caleb had spent too many years on lonely roads to trust peaceful places too easily. Lydia, he said quietly. She did not look at him, but her shoulders tightened. Yes. Keep your hands loose on the reins. Her throat moved. Why? Because if I tell you to ride, you ride. Now she looked at him. Her face had gone pale again, but not weak. Are they ahead? Likely. How many? 3 tracks. She looked toward the cottonwoods. My father sent them. Maybe. No, she said, voice flat with hurt. He did. Caleb could not argue. Some truths did not need proof when a daughter already knew the shape of them. They rode closer. The shade swallowed them slowly, first the horses' heads, then their shoulders, then Lydia's yellow dress turned dim beneath the trees. Caleb listened past the creek. A saddle creak, a bit ring, a horse breathing where no horse should be. Then a rider stepped out from behind the cottonwoods and blocked the trail. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a nervous mouth. A revolver sat on his hip, but his hand hovered near it like he was trying to remember whether he was brave. 2 more men appeared behind him, one older with a scar near his chin, the other thick-necked and red-eyed from drink. Caleb drew his horse to a slow halt. The sandy-haired man swallowed. Miss Bell, your father wants you home. Lydia sat straight in the saddle. My father knows where I am going. He says you took property that ain't yours. Lydia's hand moved toward the saddlebag. Caleb spoke before she could. Careful, that accusation will sound ugly when repeated in town. The man glanced at Caleb. This ain't your concern. I keep hearing that today. The thick-necked rider spat into the dust. Then maybe you ought to start believing it. Caleb studied them. Hired men, but not loyal ones. That mattered. Loyal men were dangerous because they acted from belief. Paid men could be made to think about the price. You boys work for Bell? Caleb asked. The older one with the scar said, used to. Used to. The sandy-haired man shifted in his saddle. Mr. Bell said he'd pay what he owed once Miss Lydia came back. Lydia's face tightened. He owes you wages. None of them answered. That is why you left, she said. Martha told me some hands left, but not why. The young man looked ashamed. I didn't want no trouble with you, Miss Lydia, but my little brother needs medicine. Mr. Bell said if we brought you back peaceful, he'd settle accounts. Lydia's eyes softened with pain, and Caleb saw the danger in it. Her heart was still tender enough to blame herself for another man's hunger. My father made you desperate, she said. The thick-necked rider snapped. Desperate men still got to eat. Caleb nodded once. True, but desperate men can choose who they rob for. The man's hand dropped closer to his gun. Caleb did not reach for his. Instead, he leaned forward slightly in the saddle. Think before you make this worse. She is 23. She has papers proving land and money were hidden from her. There is a witness at the ranch. There will be a sheriff in Prescott by nightfall if you force this. The older rider's eyes narrowed. You got proof. Lydia opened the saddlebag and pulled out the letter, keeping it close. My mother's hand, her seal, a bank note. The deed is named inside. The young rider stared at the folded paper, as if it were a Bible laid open before him. The thick-necked man laughed. A paper don't scare me. No, Caleb said, but prison might. That word did what guns sometimes could not. It made the men imagine tomorrow. The creek kept moving beside them. Somewhere above, a bird cried once and flew from the branches. The older rider slowly took his hand away from his gun belt. I ain't dragging no woman back to settle another man's debt. The thick-necked man turned on him. Jonas, don't be a fool. I've been a fool for 3 months waiting on wages from Lydia Bell, Jonas said. I ain't being one more day. The young rider looked from Jonas to Lydia, his face folded with worry. Miss Lydia, I'm sorry. I know, she said. That answer surprised him more than anger would have. The thick-necked rider cursed and spurred his horse forward, not straight at Lydia, but toward the saddlebag. Caleb moved like a man who had made his decision before the danger began. He swung his horse between them, caught the rider's wrist, and drove him sideways out of the saddle with one hard shove of shoulder and strength. The man hit the dirt with a heavy grunt. His gun slid loose and landed near the creek stones. Caleb looked down at him. Stay there. The man groaned, clutching his side. No blood, no broken cry, just pride knocked out of him and dust on his shirt. Jonas swung down, picked up the fallen revolver and emptied the cartridges into his palm. That's enough, Wade. The young rider looked close to tears from fear and shame. What do we do now? Lydia looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the saddlebag, took out 3 coins from the money wrapped in her mother's ribbon, and held them out. Caleb frowned slightly. Lydia. She did not look at him. These men worked. My father used that work and did not pay them. That wrong does not become mine, but I will not ride past hunger if I can help it. The young man stared at the coins. I can't take that. You can, Lydia said. For your brother's medicine, not for bringing me back, for letting me go. His hand shook when he accepted it. Jonas removed his hat. Miss Lydia, your mother would have been proud of that. At the mention of her mother, Lydia's eyes shone, but she only nodded. Caleb watched her then with a feeling he did not welcome because it had no place in a day this dangerous. Admiration was simple. Respect was earned. But this was something quieter and more frightening. It was the sight of a woman who had been wronged and still chose not to become cruel. They rode on through the cottonwoods, leaving the 3 men behind by the creek. For a mile, neither Caleb nor Lydia spoke. Then she said, You thought I should not give them money. I thought you might need every dollar. I might. Then why? She looked at the road ahead. Because I know what it feels like when someone powerful holds what you need and makes you beg for it. Caleb had no answer to that. By late afternoon, the sky began to bruise purple in the west. Prescott was still several miles away when they reached a small way station with a corral, a water pump, and a weather-beaten sign that read supper and beds. Caleb wanted to push on, but Ruby was tired, and Lydia's face had gone drawn with pain she refused to mention. So they stopped. Inside, the station keeper gave them stew, coffee, and 2 rooms at opposite ends of a narrow hall. Lydia ate little. She kept one hand near the saddlebag under the table, as if afraid the cedar box might vanish if she stopped feeling its weight. When Caleb walked outside to check the horses, a boy from the station came running from the road, waving a folded paper. "Mister," the boy called, breathless, "a rider paid me to give this to the woman in the yellow dress." Caleb took the paper. There was no name on the outside. He carried it in and handed it to Lydia without opening it. She stared at the fold, then broke the seal. Her eyes moved across the words. The paper slipped from her fingers and landed on the table. Caleb picked it up and read the message. "Come back by sunrise, or Martha pays for your disobedience." Lydia stood so fast her chair struck the wall behind her. Caleb looked toward the darkening road, and the old hollow place inside him filled with something colder than anger. Silas Bell had found the one chain Lydia had not known how to break. Lydia read the note again, though the words had already cut deep enough. "Come back by sunrise, or Martha pays for your disobedience." Her face went still in a way Caleb did not like. It was not calm. It was the look of someone shutting every door inside herself so the pain would not spill out where others could see it. "Martha," she whispered. Caleb folded the note and set it on the table. Around them, the way station had gone quiet. The keeper stood near the stove with a towel in his hand, pretending not to listen. A pair of freighters at the far table lowered their eyes into their coffee. Outside, the wind rubbed dust against the window glass. "We go back," Lydia said. "No," Caleb answered. She turned on him. "You read it." "I did." "Then you know he will do it." "I know he wants you to believe that." Lydia's eyes flashed. "Martha raised me after my mother died. She taught me how to braid my hair. She hid biscuits in her apron when father sent me from the table for speaking out of turn. When I cried at night, she sat on the floor beside my bed because she was afraid to be seen comforting me." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I will not leave her there to suffer for helping me." Caleb took the words without moving. She was not wrong to be afraid. That was the hard part. Fear did not become foolish just because it was used by a cruel man. "I am not saying we leave her," he said. "I am saying we do not walk into the rope he hung for you." Lydia pressed both hands flat on the table. "Then what do we do?" Caleb looked toward the window. The last light was fading and the road outside had turned the color of old iron. "We use what he fears." "My father fears nothing." "That is not true." Caleb picked up the note. "He fears witnesses, he fears law, he fears being seen plain." The station keeper cleared his throat. He was a thin man with white whiskers and kind, worried eyes. "Sheriff Barlow is in Prescott. If you ride hard, you might reach him near midnight." "And Martha?" Lydia asked. The keeper looked down. He had no answer. Caleb stood. "Is there a telegraph line here?" The keeper shook his head. "Nearest is Prescott." Lydia lifted her chin. "Then I ride back." Caleb stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "Listen to me. If you return alone, your father locks the door, tears up that letter, and tells every neighbor you ran off confused and came home ashamed. By morning, Amos Clegg will be sitting at breakfast like he owns your chair." She looked away, and he hated that he had to speak so plainly. But soft words could get a person killed in a hard moment. Caleb lowered his voice. "You spent years surviving him. That means you know his ways. Think, would he risk harming Martha if the sheriff was already riding toward Bell Crossing?" Lydia's hands curled slowly. "No." "Would he risk it if half of Prescott knew about your mother's letter, your land, and this note?" She swallowed. "No." "Then we make sure they know." The freighter at the far table shifted in his chair. He was a broad man with a gray beard and a red scarf tied at his neck. "I'm heading toward Prescott with an empty wagon. Horses are rested. I can carry word." Caleb turned to him. "Can you ride ahead?" The man nodded. "For a woman being forced, I can." His partner, younger and quiet until then, stood too. "I know Sheriff Barlow's deputy. I'll go with him so one rides if the other's horse comes up lame." Lydia stared at them, as if kindness from strangers hurt almost as much as cruelty from family. The station keeper took the note from Caleb. "I will write a copy and sign that the boy delivered it here. These men can carry both. The sheriff will not ignore a threat witnessed at my station." For one breath, Lydia looked like a girl again, lost in a world too large and rough. Then she covered her mouth with her hand and turned away. If Lydia's courage makes you wonder what you would risk for someone who once protected you, stay with this story, because the hardest choice has not yet come. Within minutes, the station changed from a place of supper and tired horses into a small camp of purpose. The keeper lit 2 lamps. The freighters saddled fresh mounts. Caleb wrote a plain account of what had happened at Bell Crossing, including the hidden cedar box, the deed, Amos Clegg's debt, and the men sent to stop them by the creek. Lydia signed her name beneath it with a hand that shook only once. When the freighters rode into the dark with the papers tucked inside a leather pouch, Lydia followed them with her eyes until they were gone. "What now?" she asked. "Now we do the thing your father will not expect," Caleb said. "What is that?" "We go back before sunrise, but not to surrender." Her breath caught. Caleb pointed toward the map nailed beside the station door, where stage routes and water stops had been marked in fading ink. "Cottonwood Wash runs behind your land, then bends near the old sheep trail. Can a horse get through there?" "Yes," Lydia said slowly. "It comes up behind the east pasture." "Near the ranch house?" "Near Martha's room." For the first time since reading the note, life returned to her eyes. "You mean to get her out?" "If she will come." "She will," then Lydia's hope faltered, "unless she is too afraid." "Then you speak to her, not me." Lydia looked down at her yellow dress, dusty, torn, and marked from the day. "I have been afraid all my life." Caleb picked up her saddlebag and handed it to her. "Afraid people can still ride." Outside, night had settled cold over the desert. The moon was thin, hardly more than a silver shaving above the black line of hills. Caleb checked the horses, tightened the cinches, and filled both canteens. Lydia stood beside Ruby, one hand on the mare's neck, whispering something too soft for him to hear. When they rode out, the way station keeper held a lantern high. Its light followed them only a little way before darkness took them. They left the main road and turned toward Cottonwood Wash. The trail was narrow, half hidden by brush and stone. Branches scraped Caleb's coat. Once, an owl lifted from a dead tree and Lydia started in the saddle, then steadied herself before Caleb could say a word. For hours they rode without speaking. Near midnight they stopped above the wash to water the horses. Lydia knelt by the creek and washed dust from her hands. The moonlight touched her face and Caleb saw how tired she was, not only from the day, from years. "My mother knew," she said suddenly. Caleb stood a few feet away, giving her space. "Knew what?" "That I might need to run." Lydia looked at the water. "She left that money and that land because she knew my father's love had conditions. I keep wondering why she did not tell me before she died." Caleb did not answer quickly. Maybe she thought she had more time. Lydia closed her eyes. The truth of that simple sentence settled between them with the sound of the creek. Then from somewhere beyond the rise, a horse whinnied. Caleb turned at once. Another answered. Lydia stood slowly, water dripping from her fingers. Across the dark ridge above Cottonwood Wash, a lantern appeared, then another. Caleb reached for his reins. "Mount up." Lydia's voice was steady, but her face was pale in the moonlight. "Are they my father's men?" Caleb looked at the lanterns moving down toward the wash. "No," he said, "too many." And in the silence that followed, a man's voice carried through the dark. "Lydia Bell, Amos Clegg wants his bride returned before dawn." The voice came again from the ridge, calm and sure, as if the darkness itself belonged to Amos Clegg. "Lydia Bell come out plain, and no one needs to be sorry." Lydia did not move. Caleb took Ruby's reins and pressed them into her hands. "Stay low and keep close." "How many?" she whispered. He counted the lanterns as they shifted between the rocks. "5 I can see." Her breath caught. 5 men for 1 woman. "No," Caleb said, 5 men for what you carry." Lydia's hand went to the saddlebag where the cedar box rested. In that moment she understood. Amos did not only want her dragged back because of pride. He wanted the letter, the bank note, and the truth buried before sunrise. A forced marriage could be dressed up as family business. Stolen land could be called confusion, but papers in a sheriff's hand could turn a powerful man into a thief with a cane. Caleb led the horses deeper into the wash. The creek was narrow there, but the banks rose high on both sides, cut by old floods and tangled with willow roots. Moonlight silvered the water. Every hoofstep sounded too loud. Behind them a rider called, "Tracks drop here." Caleb stopped beneath a leaning cottonwood and looked ahead. The wash split in two. One side ran open and shallow toward Bell Crossing. The other curved into a tight stone channel half-choked with brush. Lydia pointed to the narrow channel. "That way leads to the old spring. It is rough, but it comes behind the smokehouse." "Can the horses pass?" "Barely." "Barely is enough." They entered the channel one at a time. Branches scraped Lydia's torn sleeve. Ruby tossed her head, nervous in the tight space, but Lydia leaned forward and spoke softly into the mare's ear. "Easy girl, just a little farther." Caleb heard the riders reach the split behind them. "This way," one said. "No, the tracks cross here." Another voice, smooth and cold, answered, "Find her. Mr. Clegg does not pay for guessing." That voice was closer than Caleb liked. The channel narrowed until the stirrups brushed stone. Caleb dismounted and led his horse by the bit. Lydia did the same with Ruby. Twice, loose rocks slid underfoot and clattered into the creek. Each sound seemed to shake the night. Then the channel opened into a small hollow where an old spring bubbled under a shelf of stone. Lydia stopped so suddenly, Caleb nearly ran into her. "What is it?" She stared at the spring. "My mother used to bring me here," she said, "when father was in one of his moods. She told me this water belonged to her family before Bell Crossing ever had a name." Caleb looked at the quiet pool, the cottonwood leaves moving above it, the old stones worn smooth by years of water. It was not just land. It was memory. It was proof that Lydia had roots deeper than Silas Bell's anger. A lantern flashed at the mouth of the channel behind them. Caleb touched her arm lightly. "We have to move." They climbed from the hollow through a stand of mesquite and came out behind the east pasture. Bell Crossing lay ahead in darkness, the main house showing only 2 lamps, one in the parlor and one near the back hall. The barn was a black shape against the sky. The windmill turned slow, creaking like an old man in his sleep. Lydia pointed toward a small window on the far side of the house, Martha's room. Caleb tied the horses behind the smokehouse where the shadows were thick. "You go to the window. I will watch the yard." Lydia shook her head. "No, you do not know which boards creak." It was a small thing to say, but it carried years of knowledge. This had been her cage. She knew every weak latch and every groaning step. Caleb nodded, "Then lead." They crossed the yard in silence. Lydia lifted her skirt just enough to keep it from brushing the weeds. At the window, she tapped once, then twice, then once again. No answer. She tapped again. "Martha," she whispered, "it's me." Still nothing. Caleb looked toward the front of the house. No movement yet. Lydia pushed the window. It opened. Her face changed. She never leaves it unlatched. Caleb helped her climb inside, then followed. The room smelled of lavender, old cloth, and candle smoke. A narrow bed sat against the wall. A Bible rested on the table. A shawl lay folded on the chair. Martha was gone. Lydia stepped to the bed and touched the quilt. It is still warm. Caleb crouched near the floor. One of the braided rugs was crooked. There were marks in the dust by the door, not a struggle exactly, but hurried steps. Someone had taken Martha from the room not long before they arrived. Lydia saw the marks too. He moved her. Maybe to keep you from reaching her. Her eyes filled with fear, but she forced it down. There is a cellar under the kitchen. Father used to lock stores there when supplies ran low. They slipped into the hall. The house seemed larger in the dark, every shadow holding its breath. Lydia moved with painful care, avoiding the third board from the corner, stepping around a loose nail Caleb would never have seen. Halfway to the kitchen, voices rose from the study. Silas spoke first, angry and strained. You said your men would have her by now. Amos answered, quiet as a knife sliding from leather. And you said the papers were safe. We have both suffered disappointment. Lydia froze. Caleb leaned close to the cracked study door. Amos continued, once she is found, the marriage happens immediately. Afterward, her land becomes manageable. Her little claim will settle part of your debt. She will fight it, Silas said. Then you will say she is unwell. Grief does things to young women. Running off with a drifter will help that story. Lydia's hand covered her mouth. Caleb felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Amos did not only mean to force Lydia. He meant to erase her word completely. Then Silas said something that made Lydia's knees nearly fail. And Martha. Amos gave a soft sigh. The servant knows too much. By tomorrow, she should be on the stage east with enough coin to keep quiet. If she refuses, there are other ways to silence old women without making noise. Caleb caught Lydia before she stumbled. From somewhere beneath the kitchen floor came a faint sound. 3 taps. Then 2. Lydia's eyes widened. She knew that signal. Martha was alive under the house. Before Caleb could move, a floorboard creaked behind them. A lamp flared in the hallway. Silas Bell stood there in his shirt sleeves, his face gray with shock and rage. And in his hand was Lydia's mother's silver locket. For one long breath, Lydia could not look away from the silver locket in her father's hand. It should have been in the cedar box. It should have been with the letter and the bank note, tucked safe in the saddlebag outside behind the smokehouse. Seeing it between Silas Bell's thick fingers felt like seeing her mother pulled from her grave and used as bait. Caleb saw the change in Lydia's face and understood at once. Silas had found the horses. He had searched the saddlebag. Looking for this, Silas asked. Lydia's voice came out low. That was Mama's. Silas closed his fist around it. Your mother caused enough trouble while she lived. Seems she found a way to cause more after. The words struck Lydia, but she did not step back. The hallway lamp shook in Silas's other hand, throwing wild light across the walls. Caleb stood beside her, one hand half raised, not toward his gun, but toward Lydia, ready if she faltered. She did not falter. Where is Martha? She asked. Silas's eyes moved toward the kitchen before he could stop them. That small glance was enough. Lydia took a step forward, let her out. You have no right giving orders in my house. This was Mama's house too. Silas's face tightened. From the study, Amos Clegg's voice drifted out. Silas, do not stand there arguing in the hall. A moment later, Amos appeared in the doorway, dressed neat as a preacher on Sunday, his silver-topped cane in one hand. His eyes took in Caleb, Lydia, the locket, and the dark hall behind them. He did not look surprised, only displeased. So, Amos said, the little bird flew back to the cage after all. Lydia turned toward him. I came for Martha. And found yourself exactly where you belong. Caleb stepped slightly in front of her. Careful. Amos looked at him with mild disgust. Mr. Turner, you have made a noble mess of matters that were settled before you rode through the gate. Settled by hiding papers and threatening women. Settled by men who understand property, debt, and order. Lydia's hands curled at her sides. I am not property. Amos smiled faintly. That depends on which papers are signed and who controls them. Caleb's gaze moved to Sela's. Where are the deed and letter? Sela's lifted the locket. Safe. Lydia's breath caught, but Caleb kept watching Sela's face. The man was too proud of the locket, too eager to hurt her with it. That meant the rest might not be in his hand. Outside, far away, a horse gave a low nicker. Amos heard it too. His eyes narrowed. Did you come alone? Caleb did not answer. Sela's turned toward the back door. You brought riders here. No, Caleb said. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The freighters were on the road to Prescott. Sheriff Barlow might already have the note by now, or he might not. Night, distance, and tired horses could change any plan. From beneath the kitchen floor came another faint tapping. 3-2. Lydia moved before either man expected it. She slipped past Sela's and ran for the kitchen. Stop her, Amos snapped. Sela's lunged, but Caleb caught him by the shoulder and shoved him against the wall. Not hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to rattle the lamp and knock the breath from his chest. The flame jumped behind the glass. Do not touch her, Caleb said. Amos raised his cane, but Caleb turned on him with such quiet force that the older man stopped. The hallway held still around them. In the kitchen, Lydia dropped to her knees near the pantry door. Her hands searched the floorboards until she found the iron ring set into the trapdoor. She pulled. It did not move. A lock held it shut. Martha, she called softly, can you hear me? A muffled voice rose from below. Lydia. The sound broke something inside her. I'm here. Caleb came into the kitchen, dragging Sela's by the arm. Key. Sela spat. She is safer down there than helping you ruin yourself. Lydia stood slowly. The kitchen lamp lit the tear tracks on her face, but her eyes were clear. You locked an old woman in a cellar because she told the truth. She betrayed this family. No, Lydia said. She remembered what love was supposed to look like. Sela's mouth twisted. Love. You think your mother loved you by leaving you a worthless patch of creek land and filling your head with foolish hopes. Lydia looked at the locket in his hand. Mama loved me enough to give me a way out. You feared me enough to hide it. That sentence landed in the room and stayed there. For a second, Caleb thought Sela's might break. Not soften, maybe, but crack under the weight of being seen by his own daughter. His eyes flickered toward the floor, toward the locket, toward Lydia's face. Then Amos spoke from the doorway. Sentiment is wasting time. The softness vanished from Sela's like water in sand. Amos held up a folded packet. Caleb's stomach tightened. The blue ribbon still clung to it. Lydia's mother's letter. Looking for these? Amos asked. Your saddlebag was poorly hidden. Lydia took one step toward him. Give them back. No. Caleb's hand went near his holster, then stopped. Amos noticed and smiled. Draw on me in this house, and by morning you are the violent drifter who broke in, attacked a rancher, and frightened a confused young woman into running. Amos tapped the packet against his palm. Stories are powerful things, Mr. Turner. Men like me know how to tell them. Caleb hated that he was right. Then Martha's voice came again from beneath the floor, weaker this time. Lydia, child, the loose brick. Lydia froze. Sela's head snapped toward the trapdoor. Quiet down there. Martha coughed, then spoke louder. Behind the stove, your mama knew he would search the box one day. Lydia turned toward the stove. Silas surged forward, but Caleb caught him again. Amos stepped into the kitchen, cane lifted, but Caleb's stare stopped him at the threshold. Lydia reached behind the iron stove and felt along the wall. Her fingers found a brick that shifted under her touch. She pulled it free. Dust fell across her wrist. Inside the gap was a small oilcloth packet. She opened it with trembling hands. Another deed lay inside. Not a copy. The original, marked with seals and signatures, naming Cottonwood Wash in her mother's family name, then in Lydia's. There was also a second letter. On it in faded ink, her mother had written, "If the cedar box is taken, trust Martha." Lydia pressed the letter to her chest, and this time she did not hide her tears. Amos's face went hard. Silas looked as if the floor had vanished beneath him. Then a sound came from outside. Hooves. Not one horse, not Amos's men returning from the wash. Several riders entered the yard, slow and official, with lantern light flashing against tin stars. Caleb let out the breath he had been holding. But before anyone could move, Amos grabbed Lydia by the wrist and pulled her toward him, his cane dropping to the floor. "You will say nothing," he hissed. Lydia stared at the hand around her wrist. Then she looked at her father. And for the first time in her life, Lydia Bell had to choose what kind of man his daughter would remember him to be. For the first time in all her years under that roof, Lydia did not pull against a cruel hand. She simply stood there looking at Amos Clegg's fingers locked around her wrist, then lifted her eyes to her father. That look held no begging. It held no childish hope. It held something far worse for Lydia Bell. It held farewell. The riders outside drew closer. Lantern light swept across the kitchen window. A horse snorted near the porch and a man called out, "Sheriff's office, open up in there." Amos tightened his grip. "You will tell them this was a misunderstanding." Lydia's voice was quiet, "No." His face bent close to hers. "Think carefully." "I have done nothing but think carefully my whole life," she said. "That is how I survived this house." Caleb took one step forward. Amos shifted Lydia in front of him, not violently, but enough to make his meaning plain. "Stay back." Silas stood near the stove, breathing hard. The locket still rested in his hand. The tiny silver chain hung between his fingers like a question he could not answer. "Silas," Amos said, "tell them your daughter is unwell. Tell them this man forced his way inside. Tell them the servant was locked below for stealing." Below the floor, Martha gave a weak cry, "Lord, forgive you." The words seemed to strike Silas harder than shouting would have. His eyes moved to the trapdoor, then to Lydia, then to the locket. He opened his hand and looked down at it. For a moment, he was not the owner of Bell Crossing Ranch. He was only an aging man holding what remained of the woman he had once married and failed to honor. The sheriff knocked hard on the front door. "Lydia Bell, I know you are in there." Amos's voice sharpened, "Do it now." Silas looked at Lydia. She looked back, wrist still caught in Amos's hand, her mother's hidden deed pressed against her heart. "If you lie now," she said, "you will not be saving your ranch. You will only be burying the last good thing Mama ever believed about you." Silas flinched. Caleb saw it, Amos saw it too. "Sentimental poison," Amos snapped. "She is using grief against you." "No," Silas said. The word was so rough and low that everyone turned. Amos stared at him. "What?" Silas swallowed. His face had gone slack with a kind of fear Caleb had not seen in him before. Not fear of law, not fear of shame. Fear of finally seeing himself without excuses. "I said no." The kitchen went still. Lydia's eyes widened. For years, her no had been treated like dust under a boot. Now her father had spoken the same word, and it cracked the room open. Silas stepped toward Amos. "Let go of my daughter." Amos's face twisted. "Your daughter is the only reason you still have a roof." "Then I lost the roof before tonight," Silas said. It was not a grand speech. It did not clean his hands. It did not undo the years. But it was the first honest thing Lydia had heard from him in longer than she could remember. Amos shoved Lydia away and reached for the packet in his coat. Caleb moved first. He caught Lydia by the shoulders and steadied her as she stumbled into him. Silas stepped between Amos and the door, but not fast enough to stop Amos from throwing the cedar box papers into the stove fire. Lydia cried out. The flames caught the edge of her mother's first letter. Caleb lunged and dragged the packet back with his gloved hand. Smoke curled from the paper, one corner blackened but most of it held. The blue ribbon was scorched. The words were still there. Lydia took it from him with shaking hands. Outside, the front door opened with a crash of boots and authority. Sheriff Barlow entered with 2 deputies and the older freighter from the way station behind them. The sheriff was a square man with a gray mustache and eyes that seemed to count every lie in the room before it was spoken. His gaze moved from Amos to Lydia, then to the trapdoor. "Open that cellar," he said. No one argued. Caleb found the key hanging behind the pantry door where Silas had kept it. He unlocked the trapdoor and lifted it. Martha sat on the steps below, wrapped in darkness and a thin shawl, her face pale but her eyes alive. Lydia dropped to her knees and reached for her. "Martha!" The old woman climbed slowly, leaning on Caleb's arm. When she reached the kitchen floor, Lydia folded around her like a child and a grown woman at once. "I came back," Lydia whispered. Martha touched her hair. "I knew you would, but I prayed you would not come alone." If this moment reminds you that one brave witness can change a life, hold close to Lydia's story, because truth has arrived, but healing has not. Sheriff Barlow took the burned packet, the hidden deed, Silas's note brought from the station, and Martha's statement. Amos tried to speak over everyone at first. He called it confusion. He called it family trouble. He called Caleb a vagrant meddler looking for reward. Then the freighter stepped forward and laid the copied threat on the table. The sheriff read it once. His eyes lifted to Amos. "Your name is not on this paper, but your hands are all over tonight." Amos smiled thinly. "Careful, Sheriff. Accusations require proof." Martha's voice came from Lydia's arms. "He told Silas I should be sent east or silenced." Amos turned cold. "The word of a servant." "The word of a woman," Lydia said, "and mine beside it." Silas stood by the stove, shoulders bent. When the sheriff looked at him, the room waited. Silas could still lie. Caleb knew it. Lydia knew it. One lie from him could muddy the water, delay the truth, maybe save Amos long enough to strike again. Silas opened his mouth. Lydia did not speak. She only held Martha's hand. At last Silas said, "Amos Clegg meant to force the marriage for the Creek land. I helped hide her papers. I locked Martha below." The confession fell heavy and plain. Amos's face turned white with rage. "You fool." "No," Silas said, voice breaking. "I was a fool before." The deputies moved toward Amos. He did not fight. Men like Amos hated dirtying their hands when dignity could still be performed. He straightened his coat, lifted his chin, and let them take him. But as he passed Lydia, he bent close enough for only her, Caleb, and Silas to hear. "This is not over. Land does not protect a woman from loneliness." Lydia's hand tightened around Martha's. Caleb stepped beside her. "No," he said, "but truth is a fair start." By dawn, Amos was gone under guard, and Bell Crossing Ranch stood quiet under a pale pink sky. Silas sat alone on the porch steps with the silver locket in his open palm. Martha rested inside. The sheriff waited near the gate to escort Lydia to Prescott, where the deed would be recorded and statements sworn. Lydia stood beside Ruby, holding the cedar box, the burned letter, and the hidden deed. Caleb expected her to mount. Instead, she turned and walked back to her father. Silas looked up, and the shame on his face made him seem smaller than the man who had ruled her life. Lydia held out her hand. For one breath, Caleb thought she meant to take the locket back. But she said, "Keep it until you can remember Mama without using her name to excuse yourself." Silas's eyes filled, but Lydia had already turned away. She mounted Ruby and rode beside Caleb toward the gate. Behind them, Lydia Bell called her name once. Lydia stopped but did not look back. His voice broke in the morning air. "I do not know how to be forgiven." Lydia closed her eyes. Then she answered, "Neither do I." Lydia did not look back again until Bell Crossing Ranch had become a pale shape behind the dust. Only then did she let herself breathe. The road to Prescott felt different beneath her horse's hooves. It was the same dirt, the same heat, the same long stretch of open country, but Lydia was no longer being carried back to a place that owned her. She was riding away with her mother's deed beneath her hand, Martha safe in the sheriff's wagon behind her, and Caleb Turner beside her in silence. That silence did not feel empty. It felt like room. By mid-morning, Prescott came into view, rough and bright under the sun. Wagons lined the street. Horses stood tied before the mercantile. A blacksmith's hammer rang from an open doorway. Men turned to look as Sheriff Barlow rode in with Amos Clegg under guard and Lydia Bell following with dust on her dress, a torn sleeve, and her chin lifted like someone who had lost too much to lower it now. Whispers started before they reached the courthouse. Lydia heard her name. She heard Amos S. She heard the word marriage spoken like a dirty coin, passed from hand to hand. Caleb heard it too. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Lydia was grateful. She did not need someone fighting every whisper. She needed the truth placed where whispers could not bury it. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of paper, ink, and old wood. Lydia sat at a long table while Sheriff Barlow wrote down her statement. Martha sat beside her with a blanket around her shoulders, one wrinkled hand resting over Lydia's. Caleb stood near the window, hat in hand, watching the street below. The clerk examined the deed with round spectacles low on his nose. He read it once, then he read it again. Lydia's heart thudded so hard she could feel it in her throat. At last the clerk looked up. "This deed appears proper. Cottonwood Wash belongs to you, Miss Bell." For a moment Lydia did not understand the words. She had heard promises before. She had heard men speak as if their words were law, but this was not a promise. This was record, ink, seal, a truth that could be written into a book and held there. Martha squeezed her hand. Lydia closed her eyes. Her mother had not failed her. The door had been there all along. Sheriff Barlow took the burned letter and the threat note. Clegg will answer for intimidation and attempted fraud, maybe more, once the judge sees all this. Amos stood near the door between two deputies. He looked calm again, but his eyes were full of cold hate. "This town enjoys a show," he said, "but shows end." Sheriff Barlow gave him a hard look. So do men who think money makes them untouchable. Amos smiled. "We shall see." The deputies led him out. Lydia watched him go, and a chill moved through her. Amos did not look like a defeated man. He looked like a man counting the roads still open to him. That afternoon, Lydia took a room at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house for Martha and herself. She paid with money her mother had left her, and when the coins touched the woman's palm, Lydia felt a strange ache. Paying for shelter should have been ordinary. To her, it felt like stepping into a life where she could choose the door she slept behind. Caleb brought her cedar box up the stairs and set it on the small table by the window. "I can sleep in the stable loft," he said, "close enough if trouble comes." Lydia looked at him. His coat was dusty. His eyes were tired. He had lost his foreman chance by turning through her gate, though he had not once mentioned it. "You were going to Prescott for work," she said. "I was." "Will they still take you?" "Maybe." "That is not an answer." He gave the faintest smile. "No, ma'am, it is not." She looked down at her hands. "You should not lose your future because of me." Caleb's face grew quiet. "I did not have much of one before yesterday." The honesty in that sentence touched her more than any grand promise could have. She wanted to ask about the sadness behind his eyes, but some doors had to be opened from the inside. Before she could answer, Martha called from the bed. "Lydia." The old woman was holding the second letter, the one hidden behind the stove. Her thumb rested on a line near the bottom. "I did not tell you all of it," Martha said. Lydia went still. "All of what?" Martha looked at Caleb, then back at Lydia. "Your mother did not only leave you cottonwood wash, she left instructions." Lydia sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Martha's voice trembled as she read. "If Silas loses himself to pride, do not let pride be the thing that answers him. The land is Lydia's, but water was meant to keep life from dying. My daughter must choose what kind of woman she will become when she finally holds power in her own hands." Lydia stared at the page. A knock sounded downstairs. Heavy boots crossed the hall. Mrs. Whittaker's voice rose, worried and polite. Then Sheriff Barlow appeared at the open doorway, hat in his hand. "Miss Bell," he said, "your father is asking to speak with you." Lydia's chest tightened. "Here." "At the courthouse. He has agreed to sign a full confession against Clegg, but he says there is one thing he will only tell you." Caleb straightened. "Could be a trick." The sheriff nodded. "Could be shame." Lydia looked at Martha, then at the letter in her lap. "What thing?" she asked. Sheriff Barlow's expression darkened. "He says your mother's death was not the whole truth you were told." Lydia did not answer Sheriff Barlow at once. The little room at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house seemed to shrink around her. Martha sat on the bed with her mother's letter in her lap. Caleb stood near the window, his hat held tight in both hands. Outside, Prescott moved on as if the whole world had not just shifted under Lydia's feet. "My mother's death," Lydia said. Sheriff Barlow's face softened. "That is what your father said." Martha closed her eyes, and Lydia saw it. The old woman knew. Lydia turned to her slowly. "Martha." Martha's hand trembled over the letter. "I knew pieces, child. Not all. Your mother made me promise not to speak unless the truth came looking for you." Lydia felt the room tilt. All her life she had been told her mother had died from a winter sickness. A sad thing. A simple thing. A thing no one could blame. She had carried that grief like a stone in her apron pocket, always there, always heavy but familiar. Now even that stone had a crack in it. "I will go," Lydia said. Caleb stepped forward. "You do not have to face him tonight." She looked at him. In his eyes she saw worry but not command. He was not telling her what to do. He was offering her a place to set down fear if she needed to. "I know," she said. "That is why I can." At the courthouse, Silas Bell sat alone in a back room with a lamp burning low. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the ride from Bell Crossing had taken years from him instead of hours. The fine vest was gone. His shirt sleeves were wrinkled. In his hands he held the silver locket. Lydia stood in the doorway. For once he did not tell her to come in. She entered because she chose to. Sheriff Barlow waited outside with Caleb and Martha. The door stayed open, but the words belonged to Lydia and her father. Silas looked down at the locket. "Your mother did have fever." Lydia said nothing. But fever was not what broke her first. His voice sounded rough, scraped raw by shame. "Before she died, she learned I had borrowed against the ranch. She learned Amos Clegg had his eye on cottonwood wash. She knew I meant to use that land one day if I could get control of it." Lydia's hands went cold. She argued with me, Silas said. Not loud. Your mother was never loud. She stood right in the kitchen and told me that land was yours, and that if I tried to take it, I would lose both wife and daughter in the eyes of God. His mouth twisted with pain. I told her she was foolish. I told her no woman in my house would shame me over a strip of creek grass. Lydia held herself still. Silas opened the locket and looked at the tiny portrait inside. She walked out in the cold that night to take the deed to Martha. I did not stop her. I let pride keep me by the fire while she went out sick and weak. By morning, the fever had worsened. A tear slid down his face and disappeared into his beard. I did not strike her, he whispered, but I let my hardness stand where love should have stood. After she died, I told myself sickness took her. That was easier than saying my pride helped send her into the cold. Lydia looked at the man before her. For years, she had imagined a confession would feel like thunder. Instead, it felt like a door opening onto a room full of dust. So you punish me for surviving her, Lydia said. Silas closed his eyes. Yes. The word was small, but it carried the weight of every locked drawer, every stolen choice, every quiet meal where Lydia had learned to measure the sound of his boots. I cannot fix it, he said. I cannot ask you to come home. I cannot ask you to call me good. I signed the confession against Amos. I signed Cottonwood Wash fully to you before the clerk. Bell Crossing will likely be sold to pay what I owe. He held out the locket. Lydia looked at it for a long time before taking it. The silver was warm from his hand. I thought forgiveness would feel like opening a gate, Silas said, but I do not know how to reach it. Lydia closed the locket around her mother's face. Maybe you start by not asking me to carry you there. Silas bowed his head. She turned to leave, then stopped. Mama did not die because of me. His face crumpled. No, Lydia, never because of you. Those words reached a place inside her no one had touched since childhood. She pressed the locket to her chest and walked out before her knees could weaken. In the hall, Martha rose and opened her arms. Lydia went to her, and the old woman held her like she had held her after nightmares long ago. Caleb stood a few steps away, giving the moment room, but Lydia reached one hand toward him. He took it. Months passed, and the truth did what truth often does. It did not make life easy, but it made life clean. Amos Clegg lost his polished name first, then his power. Men who had once tipped hats to him now crossed the street to avoid him. His accounts were searched, his false claims exposed, and when the judge sent him away from Prescott under bond and disgrace, he left with no carriage, no cane, and no bride. Silas sold most of Bell Crossing to settle debts. He kept a small cabin near the far ridge and worked his remaining acres with his own hands. Lydia did not visit often, but once each month she sent Martha with bread and coffee. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was mercy with a fence around it. Cottonwood Wash became Lydia's beginning. She built a small white house near the spring where her mother had once taken her. Martha planted lavender by the door. Ruby grazed in the creek pasture. The old cedar box sat on a shelf, no longer hidden, holding the scorched letter, the blue ribbon, and the deed that had survived fire, lies, and fear. Caleb stayed in Prescott after all. The foreman job was gone, but a better one came from Sheriff Barlow's brother, who needed a steady man at a ranch north of town. Caleb worked there by day and rode to Cottonwood Wash in the evenings, never arriving empty-handed. Sometimes he brought flour, sometimes nails. Once he brought a little glass jar for wildflowers, and Lydia laughed for the first time in a way that made him look down at his boots, because his own heart had startled him. Love did not arrive like a storm. It came like water returning to dry ground. A quiet supper, a repaired fence, a shared silence on the porch. Caleb never asked Lydia to forget what had happened. Lydia never asked Caleb to stop missing the wife he had buried years before. They simply made room for both sorrow and hope, and in that room something honest grew. One evening in spring, when the cottonwoods were bright and the creek ran gold with sunset, Caleb stood beside Lydia near the old spring. "I turned off the road because I heard you say no," he said, "but I stayed because I learned who you were after." Lydia touched the locket at her throat, and who was that? A woman who could have become bitter, but chose to become free. She looked toward the house, where Martha's lamp glowed in the window, steady and warm. Then Lydia took Caleb's hand. If this story stayed with your heart, remember Lydia's choice. Freedom is not only leaving what hurt you, but learning to live without letting that hurt become your whole name. A year later, beneath the cottonwoods of Cottonwood Wash, Lydia Bell married Caleb Turner in a blue dress she chose herself. Martha cried openly. Sheriff Barlow cleared his throat too many times. Even Silas watched from a distance under his worn hat, not forgiven, not forgotten, but changed enough to stand quietly and ask for nothing. As the sun lowered, Lydia placed her mother's locket around her neck and looked across the land that had once been hidden from her. The creek moved softly through the grass. The house lantern shone in the window. And for the first time in her life, when Lydia said yes, the whole world seemed to understand that the word belonged only to her.